The first time I met Evelyn Reed, she shook my hand, gave me that dazzling smile of hers, and said, "We're a community of good neighbors here, Mr. Hayes." A year later, her contractors were pouring 15 feet of her new garage foundation directly onto my property. Turns out, her definition of a good neighbor was someone who didn't mind giving up their backyard without a fight. She was about to find out I wasn't that kind of neighbor. Let me back up. My name is Arthur Hayes. Most folks just call me Art. For 45 years, I was an architect. I lived in a world of blueprints and building codes, a world where every line had a purpose and every angle was a promise. When my wife passed and the silence in our big city house became too loud, I sold it. I bought a modest, well-built home in a community called Lakeside Meadows. It was managed by a homeowners association, an HOA, which at the time seemed like a guarantee of the one thing I craved: order. I wanted my golden years to be quiet. I wanted to read my books, tend to my small garden, and watch the sun set over the lake without a lick of drama. For the first year, that's exactly what I got. The lawns were all manicured to the same perfect height. The mailboxes stood in a neat uniform row. It was peaceful, it was predictable, and it was all ruled by Evelyn Reed. Evelyn wasn't just the president of the HOA, she was the HOA. She was a woman probably in her late 60s, always impeccably dressed in crisp linen suits, her silver hair styled in a helmet of perfection that seemed immune to wind or humidity. She moved through the neighborhood with the serene confidence of a monarch surveying her domain. That smile she gave me, it was a work of art, bright, wide, and completely impenetrable. It was the kind of smile that could tell you your house was on fire, and you'd somehow feel obligated to thank her for the information. She held court at the monthly HOA meetings, wielding her gavel like a scepter. She knew every rule, every bylaw, every covenant. She was the arbiter of taste, the enforcer of conformity. And people, for the most part, seemed to love her for it. They saw her as the guardian of our property values, the tireless protector of our tranquil little world. I saw something else. I saw the flash of steel in her eyes when someone dared to question a ruling. I saw the way her smile tightened, just for a second, when a vote didn't go her way. I'd spent a lifetime reading the fine print, both on paper and in people. And in Evelyn Reed's fine print, I saw a clause for absolute power. Still, I kept to myself. I paid my dues on time. I kept my lawn immaculate. I was a model resident. Her kingdom didn't affect my patch of earth, so I let the queen have her reign, until the day her kingdom invaded mine. It started with noise, the deep rumble of a cement truck, the high-pitched whine of power saws, the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of hammers. It was coming from her property, right on the edge of our shared boundary line, a line that was clearly marked by a row of old, sturdy azalea bushes I'd planted myself. I didn't think much of it at first. People do renovations. It's their right. I just closed my study window and turned up the volume on my classical music. But the noise went on for days, then weeks. The sheer scale of it started to feel substantial. One Saturday morning, coffee in hand, I decided to take a closer look. I walked to the edge of my backyard, stopping just before the azaleas, and my heart did a slow, heavy turn in my chest. This wasn't a simple patio extension. Over on her side, a massive foundation had been poured, a concrete slab easily the size of a two-car garage. Workers were framing walls, raising trusses. It was a structure of significant size. But that wasn't what made the coffee go cold in my hand. It was the location. The edge of that new concrete slab wasn't just on the property line. It was well past it. It had swallowed my azalea bushes whole. The fresh gray concrete stretched deep into my yard, a brutalist scar on my green lawn. My mind, the architect's mind, started calculating. I could see the invisible lines of my property survey as clearly as if they were drawn in neon. I knew my plot's dimensions down to the last inch. This wasn't a minor miscalculation. This wasn't a foot or two. This was a full-scale invasion. I went back inside, my hands trembling just slightly. Not with rage, not yet. With a kind of profound disbelief. This had to be a mistake, a colossal, unbelievably arrogant mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. No one, not even a woman as self-assured as Evelyn Reed, would be so brazen as to just take someone else's land. I pulled out my official property documents from my safe. The survey map, with its notarized stamps and crisp, clear lines, felt cool and reassuring in my hands. I took a tape measure from my workshop. Then, I walked back outside, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I walked onto my lawn, right up to the edge of the new construction. I knelt, hooking the end of the tape measure to the old metal survey pin that still sat, half buried, in the corner of my lot. I unspooled the tape, letting it run straight along the line where my azaleas used to be. The number on the tape measure, right where the edge of her new foundation sat, was 15 feet. 15 feet. She had built on 15 feet of my land. Land I owned, land I paid taxes on, land that was, according to every law in this country, mine. I stood there for a long time, the tape measure still in my hand. The sounds of the hammers and saws faded into a dull roar. And in that moment, I knew with a cold, hard certainty that settled deep in my bones. This was no mistake. This was a declaration. The Queen had decided to expand her castle, and my little patch of earth was simply in her way. My first instinct wasn't to yell. 45 years of dealing with contractors, city planners, and stubborn clients had taught me that the man who loses his temper loses. No, my first instinct was to be methodical, to be prepared. I went back inside, laid my notarized survey map on the kitchen table, and put on a fresh collared shirt. I was going to approach this like a business meeting, a very serious, very unwelcome business meeting. I walked over to her house, my property map rolled up in my hand like a baton. The foreman of the construction crew, a burly man with a sunburnt neck, saw me coming and gave me a wary look. I ignored him. My business was with the Queen herself. She was on her back patio, sipping iced tea from a tall, elegant glass, observing the work with a look of serene satisfaction. She saw me approach, and that dazzling smile clicked into place. "Art, how lovely to see you out and about," she chirped, as if I were just dropping by for a neighborly chat. "Evelyn," I said, my voice calm and even. "We have a problem." I unrolled the map on her pristine glass patio table. I pointed to the clear black line that marked the boundary between our properties. Then I pointed to the fresh concrete slab, now just 50 feet away from us. "Your new foundation," I said, keeping my finger steady on the map, "is 15 feet inside my property line." She didn't even glance at the map. Not once. She just took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, her eyes twinkling with something that looked dangerously like amusement. "Oh, Art," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a little adjustment." "A 15-foot adjustment is not little, Evelyn. It's my land. This map is a legal, notarized document." She finally leaned forward, but only to push the map away with the tips of her manicured fingers, as if it were something distasteful. "Paperwork can be so rigid, don't you think? The truth is, the old line was awkward. It cut the corner of this lot in a very unappealing way. The board and I discussed it, and we agreed that a slight realignment would be a vast improvement to the community's overall aesthetic." I stared at her, dumbfounded. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it was breathtaking. "The board? Evelyn, the HOA board doesn't have the authority to realign legally owned property. You can't just vote to take my land because you think it looks better." "We're all neighbors here, Art," she said, her smile becoming a little tighter, a little more fixed. "We have to be flexible for the greater good. It's a much more practical layout now. You should be pleased." Pleased? She thought I should be pleased that she had stolen a piece of my backyard. "I'm not pleased," I said, my voice dropping. "I want the construction stopped, now, and I want that slab removed from my property." For the first time, the mask slipped. The smile vanished, and the steel I'd always seen in her eyes came to the forefront. "That's not going to happen," she said, her voice flat and cold. "The project has been approved. The concrete has been poured. It's done." She stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. "You're making this far more complicated than it needs to be, Art. I suggest you go home and think about what it means to be a part of a community." I walked back to my house, my mind reeling. She hadn't denied it. She had admitted it, justified it, and dared me to do something about it. Fine, I would. The next morning, I typed up a formal, official complaint. I cited the specific property laws that had been violated. I attached a certified copy of my survey map. I detailed my conversation with Evelyn, quoting her dismissal of my legal ownership. I sent it via certified mail to the Lakeside Meadows HOA Board of Directors, demanding an immediate cease and desist on the construction and a formal response within 10 business days. Exactly 7 days later, I received a letter in my mailbox. It was on the HOA's thick, creamy letterhead. The letter was short. It stated that the board had reviewed my grievance and, after careful consideration, found it to be without merit. It cited an obscure bylaw, Section 9, Article C, which apparently gave the board the right to authorize minor boundary adjustments for the purpose of community enhancement. It was signed by the entire board, all 5 of them. They were a wall of steel, and Evelyn was the one holding the hammer. And then the harassment began. It started small. A letter in my mailbox, 2 days after the board's rejection. A photograph of my trash can was attached. I had, according to the letter, placed it at the curb at 6:55 a.m. for the 7 a.m. pickup. A violation. A $25 fine. A week later, another letter. This time, it was my garden hose. It was not coiled in a perfectly circular fashion, as stipulated by the aesthetic code. $50 fine. Then it was the wind chimes my late wife had loved, which had hung on my porch for over a year. Suddenly they were an unapproved auditory nuisance. $100. It was a slow, methodical campaign of psychological warfare. Every week, a new, absurd violation, a new fine. I felt like I was being watched constantly, my every move scrutinized, waiting for the slightest misstep. It was designed to wear me down, to make my life so unpleasant that I would either give up or sell my house and leave. The poison started to spread. My next-door neighbor on the other side, a friendly fellow named Bob, who I often chatted with over the fence, suddenly stopped making eye contact. When I'd wave, he'd give a curt nod and hurry inside. I saw him talking to Evelyn on her lawn one afternoon. She was smiling that sweet smile, patting his arm. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew what she was doing. She was painting me as the villain, the troublemaker, the old crank who was disrupting their perfect, peaceful community. I was being isolated, pushed out. They weren't just trying to take my land anymore. They were trying to take my peace of mind. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the pile of violation notices spread out before me. The fines now totaled over $300. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of her contractors packing up for the day. The frame of her new garage was up now, a dark skeleton looming over my property line in the twilight. I looked at the letters. I looked at the structure taking shape on my land, and I realized I had been a fool. I had tried to fight this with reason. I had tried to fight it by following their rules, but their rules were designed for only one outcome, for them to win. It was time to find a new set of rules. It was time to find a lawyer. I didn't just open the phone book. That's not how I operate. An architect doesn't pick a contractor at random. You find the specialist with the right tools for the job. I spent the next 2 days in my study, not reading books, but scouring legal databases and online reviews. I wasn't looking for a real estate lawyer. I was looking for a giant killer, someone who specifically fought corrupt homeowners associations. And that's how I found the name Chloe Martinez. Her office wasn't in some high-rise glass tower. It was a modest second-floor walk-up over a bookstore downtown. The space was bright, modern, and uncluttered. No mahogany desks or dusty law tomes, just clean lines and focused energy. And then she walked in. Chloe Martinez couldn't have been a day over 35. She was sharp, energetic, with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wasn't what I expected, but as she gave me a firm handshake and a confident smile, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. "Mr. Hayes," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "You said on the phone that your HOA is giving you some trouble." I laid it all out for her. I didn't editorialize. I didn't complain. I just presented the facts, the way I would present a case to a zoning board. I showed her the survey map. I showed her the deed to my property. I showed her the HOA's letter rejecting my complaint, the one citing the absurd community enhancement clause. And finally, I laid the stack of violation notices on her desk. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. She examined each document, her focus absolute. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her legal pad. "The land grab is blatant," she said, her voice calm. "The harassment is textbook. I've seen it a dozen times. They're trying to bleed you dry and make you miserable until you just go away." "So, what do we do?" I asked. "Do we sue for the property line?" Chloe smiled, a quick, sharp smile that was the polar opposite of Evelyn's. "Mr. Hayes, art, suing just for the land is what they expect. We'd get tied up in court for a year. You'd probably win, but you'd be out thousands in legal fees, and they would have made your life a living hell in the meantime. It's a war of attrition, and they have the home field advantage." She leaned forward, and her eyes lit up with a fire that told me I had come to the right place. "We're not going to play their game," she said. "We're going to change the game entirely. This isn't just about your 15 feet of land anymore. A woman like Evelyn Reed, a board this compliant. This kind of arrogance is never an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a deeper rot." She picked up her pen. "We're not just going on the defense. We're going on the attack. We are going to petition the court for full discovery. We're not just asking for documents related to your property. We are demanding access to everything from the last 5 years. Every board meeting minute, including the private executive sessions, every financial statement, every contract they've signed with every vendor, and most importantly, every single email exchange between the board members." I felt a slow grin spread across my face. "You think they're hiding something?" "I know they're hiding something," she corrected me gently. "People like Evelyn Reed don't build empires, no matter how small, without burying a few bodies in the foundation. Our job is to start digging." The next day, a legal courier delivered a thick packet to the Lakeside Meadows HOA office. It was no longer a complaint from a disgruntled resident. It was a formal legal demand, backed by the power of the court. The reaction was immediate. My phone rang. It was Chloe. "They're already fighting it," she said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "Their lawyer is calling our request overly broad, burdensome, and irrelevant. They're trying to stonewall us." I stood by my window, looking out at the half-finished garage that squatted on my lawn. For the first time, it didn't look like a monument to Evelyn's power. It looked like a mistake, a very big, very expensive mistake. "So what does that mean?" I asked Chloe. I could almost hear her smile over the phone. "It means," she said, "that we've officially hit a nerve, and we're about to find out exactly what they're so desperate to protect." What followed was a 2-week legal skirmish fought entirely on paper. The HOA's lawyer, a slick character from a big downtown firm, filed motion after motion to block our discovery request. He argued it was a fishing expedition, that it was an invasion of the board's privacy, that it was completely disproportionate to a simple property line dispute. Chloe countered every single one. Her arguments were sharp, concise, and brilliant. She wasn't arguing about my 15 feet of land anymore. She was arguing that the board's pattern of behavior, the immediate rejection of a valid claim, followed by a coordinated campaign of harassment, suggested a systemic abuse of power. The documents, she argued, were not irrelevant. They were essential to proving a pattern of malice. It felt like an eternity. Every day, I'd walk past that garage, which was now fully framed and roofed. Every other day, another ridiculous fine would appear in my mailbox. A new one claimed the oil stain on my driveway, no bigger than a quarter, was a chemical hazard, $50. I paid every single one, documenting the check, the date, and the absurd reason. I was building my own file. Finally, the day came. We had a hearing before a judge. I sat in the back of the courtroom while Chloe presented our case. She was magnificent, calm, professional, but with an underlying passion for justice that was impossible to ignore. The HOA's lawyer was smooth and condescending, but the judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, wasn't impressed by his charm. She looked at the evidence, my survey, the board's dismissive letter, the stack of petty violations. Then she looked at the HOA's lawyer. "Counselor," the judge said, her voice dry as dust, "it appears your clients are either breathtakingly incompetent or they are deliberately targeting this man. Either way, I think a little transparency is in order. Motion for discovery is granted. You have 1 week to produce the documents." The victory felt monumental. Exactly 1 week later, a delivery truck pulled up to Chloe's small office. They unloaded 12 bankers' boxes, filled to the brim with paper. Financial records, meeting minutes, contracts, correspondence. They also handed over a hard drive containing the digital files, including the emails. It was a mountain. "Well," Chloe said, looking at the tower of boxes that now filled her conference room, "they wanted to bury us in paperwork. Let's hope they buried themselves in the process." And so, our work began. For the next 3 weeks, I spent more time in Chloe's office than I did in my own home. My architect's eye for detail, for finding the one misplaced line in a 1,000-page blueprint, had found a new purpose. We lived on stale coffee and takeout sandwiches. We waded through an ocean of paper, our highlighters bleeding yellow, pink, and green onto page after page. At first, it was a slog. Endless pages of mind-numbing minutes from meetings discussing lawn maintenance and the color of acceptable holiday decorations. But slowly, patterns began to emerge. The first crack appeared in the financial statements. "Look at this," I said to Chloe one evening, pointing to a line item in the 2023 budget. "Community Beautification Project, Phase 1, $150,000. "That's a lot for planting flowers," she murmured, peering over my shoulder. I flipped through more pages. "Here it is again in 2024. Landscape Enhancement, Phase 2, $200,000. The descriptions were incredibly vague, but the payments were all very specific. They were all made out to the same company, Reed & Sons Construction. Chloe raised an eyebrow. "Reed, as in Evelyn Reed?" A quick search on the state's business registry gave us our answer. The owner of Reed & Sons Construction was listed as one Thomas Reed. A little more digging on social media, and we found a photo of Evelyn at a family barbecue, her arm slung around a man she referred to in the caption as, "My wonderful big brother, Tom." "Well, well, well," Chloe whispered, a slow grin spreading across her face. "Our queen isn't just grabbing land. She's been using the HOA's treasury as her own family piggy bank." That one discovery opened the floodgates. We now knew what to look for. We cross-referenced every payment made to Reed & Sons with the HOA's meeting minutes. We found that Evelyn had personally championed these beautification projects, insisting her brother's company was the only one that could handle the job with the necessary care. There was never a competitive bidding process. It was blatant, shameless corruption. But there was more. While reviewing the property records associated with these projects, Chloe noticed something else. 2 other minor boundary adjustments had been approved by the board in the last 3 years. Both times, the adjustments benefited friends of Evelyn on the board, and both times, the adjacent property owners, the ones who lost a few feet of their land, had sold their homes and moved away within a year. We found their names, we tracked them down. I spoke to one of them on the phone, a retired schoolteacher who now lived in Arizona. Her voice trembled with a rage that was still fresh after 2 years. "They made our lives a nightmare," she told me. "Fines every week, nasty rumors. They said our dog barked too much, that our grandkids were too loud. It was all lies. We couldn't take it anymore. We sold at a loss just to get out. It was my story. It was the same playbook. We now had a pattern of abuse. We had financial corruption. We had everything we needed to destroy them in a civil suit. But Chloe was still searching for the final, definitive link. The one thing that would prove, beyond any doubt, that the campaign against me was a deliberate, malicious conspiracy. She found it at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. I had gone home to get a few hours of sleep, but she had stayed, fueled by coffee and a righteous fury. My phone buzzed on my nightstand. It was a text from her. I found it. "The smoking gun. Get down here." When I arrived, she was sitting in the quiet, empty office, her face illuminated by the glow of her computer screen. She didn't say a word. She just pointed. On the screen was an email. To Frank Miller, HOA Vice President. From Evelyn Reed. Date, 3 days after I filed my initial complaint. Subject, the Hayes problem. The email read, "Frank, as we discussed, the Hayes complaint needs to be handled decisively. The garage project cannot be delayed. I need you to instruct the Architectural Review Committee to start enforcement immediately. Be creative. Lawn, paint, noise, trash. I don't care what it is. We need to make his life so unpleasant that he either gives up this foolish crusade or decides to sell. We need to send a message that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated in our community. Let's make sure he gets it, loud and clear. Evelyn, I read it once, then twice. My blood ran cold. There it was, in black and white. The order, the conspiracy, the malicious intent laid bare in her own arrogant words. This wasn't just a byproduct of her land grab. It was a weapon she had deliberately aimed at me. I looked at Chloe. Her eyes were blazing. This was never about a garage, I said, my voice barely a whisper. No, she replied, her voice filled with a cold, hard finality. This was about power, and we now have everything we need to burn her kingdom to the ground. The days leading up to the annual HOA meeting felt like the heavy charged calm before a thunderstorm. The final violation notice appeared in my mailbox. Something about the shade of my guest room curtains not being on the approved palette. I didn't even open it. I just placed it on the top of the thick file Chloe and I had compiled. It was Exhibit A in a case that was no longer about curtains or property lines, but about the soul of our community. We didn't file the lawsuit immediately. That wasn't Chloe's plan. A lawsuit would be a quiet, slow-moving affair fought by lawyers in empty courtrooms. Chloe wanted something more. She wanted a public reckoning. Evelyn's power comes from the perception of the community, she had explained to me in her office. The boxes of evidence now neatly labeled and stacked against the wall. They see her as their protector. We have to show them who she really is, all at once. We have to do it on her stage, in front of her subjects. Her stage was the Lakeside Meadows Community Clubhouse. The night of the annual meeting, the room was packed. It was the only meeting of the year most residents bothered to attend. The one where they voted on the new budget and elected board members. The air was thick with the smell of cheap coffee and a kind of forced suburban pleasantry. I found a seat in the back row. Chloe sat beside me, a slim leather briefcase on her lap. She looked calm, composed, but I could see the focused intensity in her eyes. She was a gladiator waiting for the gates to open. Evelyn and her board sat at a long table at the front of the room, facing the crowd. She was in her element. She wore a sharp cream-colored suit, looking every bit the benevolent leader. She smiled, she laughed, she called residents by their first names. Her vice president, Frank Miller, a portly man with a nervous sweat on his upper lip, sat to her right, nodding along to her every word like a bobblehead doll. The meeting droned on with the usual business, the treasurer's report, the landscaping committee's update. I could feel the tension coiling in my stomach. I saw neighbors who had once been friendly now, giving me wide berth, their eyes sliding away if I happened to look in their direction. The poison had worked. In this room, I was the pariah. Finally, Evelyn tapped her gavel. "And that brings us to the final item on our agenda," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "New business and open comments from the floor." Her eyes scanned the room, and then, as if by accident, they landed on me. Her smile was a mask of polite concern. "I see Mr. Hayes is with us tonight," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone. A low murmur went through the crowd. "Mr. Hayes, I know you've had some disagreements with the board's recent decisions. We believe in transparency here. Perhaps you'd like to share your concerns with your neighbors. It was a trap, a public ambush. She wanted me to stand up, to sound like a bitter, angry old man complaining about his lawn. She wanted to humiliate me. I didn't move. I just looked at Chloe. Chloe stood up, her movements fluid and confident. "Thank you, Madam President," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the murmuring. "My name is Chloe Martinez. I am legal counsel for Mr. Arthur Hayes, and yes, we would like to address the community." A hush fell over the room. The word legal counsel changed the air completely. Evelyn's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. This wasn't part of her script. Chloe walked to the front of the room, carrying her briefcase. "We won't take up much of your time," she said, addressing the crowd. "We just have a short presentation." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a small, powerful projector and a laptop. Within a minute, she had it set up, aimed at the large white screen behind the board's table. The faces of Evelyn and her board were suddenly illuminated by the bright, blank square of light. They looked like startled deer. As many of you know, Chloe began, Mr. Hayes has been in a dispute with the board regarding the new structure being built on Mrs. Reed's property. The board has maintained this is a minor issue. We are here tonight to show you that this is not a minor issue. It is, in fact, the tip of a very large, very corrupt iceberg. The first image flashed on the screen. It was my survey map, the property line clearly marked in red. Next to it was an aerial photograph of the garage, showing the 15-foot encroachment. This is Mr. Hayes's land, Chloe said simply. Stolen in plain sight. Evelyn grabbed the microphone. This is a private matter, and this is not the proper forum. I believe it is the perfect forum, Chloe interrupted, her voice unwavering, because this isn't just about Mr. Hayes. The next slide appeared. It was a list of payments, large payments, all from the Lakeside Meadows HOA account, and all made to one company, Reed & Sons Construction. Over the last 3 years, Chloe's voice narrated, your HOA has paid over $400,000 of your dues to a company owned by Thomas Reed, Evelyn Reed's brother. A collective gasp went through the room. People started turning to their neighbors, whispering. Frank Miller, the vice president, began to look physically ill. All of these contracts were approved by the board without a competitive bidding process, a direct violation of your own bylaws, Chloe continued, her voice like a hammer striking a nail. Slide after slide appeared. Bank statements. Inflated invoices for landscaping that never happened. Then came the photos of the 2 other homes, the ones whose owners had been driven out. Chloe read a sworn statement from the retired school teacher in Arizona, detailing the same campaign of harassment I had endured. The mood in the room had shifted from quiet curiosity to a low, angry hum. The faces that had once looked at me with suspicion were now turned to the front table with open hostility. Evelyn was white as a sheet, but she held herself rigid, her hands gripping the edge of the table. These are lies, she hissed into the microphone. Vicious, unfounded lies from a disgruntled resident. Are they? Chloe asked softly. She clicked to the final slide, and there it was. Her email to Frank Miller, projected 10 feet high for everyone to see. Make his life so unpleasant that he either gives up this foolish crusade or decides to sell. We need to send a message. Let's make sure he gets it, loud and clear. Silence. A dead, heavy silence filled the room. You could have heard a pin drop. Every eye was on the screen, reading the words, then shifting to Evelyn's horrified face, then to Frank Miller, who looked like he was about to faint. Someone in the front row stood up. It was Bob, my neighbor who had been avoiding me. Is this true, Evelyn? He asked, his voice shaking with anger. Did you write this? Evelyn opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And then the dam broke. Frank Miller shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He pointed a trembling finger at Evelyn. It was her! He shouted, his voice cracking. It was all her idea. She made us do it. I told her we were going too far. The room erupted. People were shouting, standing up, demanding answers. The other board members were shrinking in their seats, trying to become invisible. But all I saw was Evelyn. In the midst of the chaos, she sat perfectly still. The mask was gone. The smile was gone. The power was gone. All that was left was a brittle old woman, exposed and utterly defeated under the harsh glare of the projector. Her kingdom had crumbled around her in less than 10 minutes. Chloe quietly packed her projector back into her briefcase. Her work was done. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt a profound sense of relief. It was the feeling of a heavy weight, one I didn't even realize I had been carrying, finally being lifted. Not just from my shoulders, but from the shoulders of everyone in that room. The storm had broken, and the reign of the Queen was finally over. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The lawsuit we filed the next day was less of a battle and more of a formal surrender. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and a conspiracy to harass, Evelyn and the entire board resigned immediately. They didn't even attempt to fight it. Their high-priced lawyer, seeing the writing on the wall, negotiated a settlement. The terms were ironclad. The HOA's insurance, after a great deal of pressure, paid for my legal fees, and a significant sum in damages for the harassment. The board members involved were personally liable for repaying the money Evelyn had funneled to her brother's company. And, most satisfyingly, the settlement stipulated that Evelyn's illegal garage was to be demolished at her own personal expense within 30 days. But the civil suit was only the beginning. The district attorney's office, tipped off by Chloe, launched their own investigation into the financial fraud. Last I heard, Evelyn and her brother were facing felony charges. Her beautiful house, the one she lorded over us from, now has a large "for sale" sign on the lawn. The Queen was in exile. A week after the settlement was signed, a demolition crew was scheduled to arrive. But something funny happened. The evening before, my neighbor Bob, the one who had been avoiding me, knocked on my door. He was holding a crowbar. "Art," he said, his face etched with embarrassment. "I feel like a fool for believing her. I was wondering if maybe you could use an extra hand tomorrow." By the next morning, it wasn't just Bob. A dozen neighbors, men and women, I had only ever exchanged polite nods with, showed up in my yard. They brought sledgehammers, wheelbarrows, and coolers filled with water and beer. They weren't going to let Evelyn have the last word by simply paying someone to clean up her mess. This was personal. We tore that garage down ourselves, piece by piece. Every stud we ripped out, every nail we pulled, felt like an act of liberation. We were dismantling more than just a building. We were tearing down the monument to her arrogance. We were reclaiming our community with our own two hands. We worked all weekend, fueled by a shared sense of purpose I hadn't seen in this neighborhood before. We laughed, we sweated, we told stories. And when the last wall came crashing down, a cheer went up that echoed across the lake. Where the concrete slab had been, there was now just a patch of scarred earth. We didn't leave it that way. We brought in topsoil, raked it smooth, and laid down fresh sod. We planted a small garden in the center, with a simple stone bench. It wasn't my garden or her old yard. It was just ours. A quiet place where that ugly scar used to be. In the weeks that followed, Lakeside Meadows began to heal. An interim board was formed, made up of honest, decent people who were more interested in serving the community than in ruling it. They held open meetings, they were transparent about the budget, and they methodically went through the bylaws, striking out the absurd punitive rules Evelyn had put in place. They asked me to join the board. I politely declined. "I'm an architect," I told them with a smile. "I'm better at building things than at running them." But I did agree to serve on the new Architectural Review Committee. My only condition was that its new motto would be, "Reason, not rules." Now, my mornings are quiet again. I sit on my back porch with my coffee, and I look out over my yard. The grass has grown in thick and green over the spot where the garage once stood. The wind chimes my wife loved are back on my porch, their gentle music no longer a violation, but just a part of the peaceful morning air. I don't hate Evelyn Reed. I don't waste my energy on that. I just see her as a cautionary tale, a story about how power, even on the smallest scale, can corrupt, and how silence in the face of that corruption is a kind of poison. I learned something through all of this. I came here seeking order, but what I found was that true order isn't about rigid control or perfect uniformity. It's about respect. It's about fairness. It's about knowing where the lines are and having the courage to stand your ground when someone tries to cross them. My name is Art Hayes. I'm a retired architect who just wanted a little peace and quiet. Instead, I got a war. But in fighting it, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. A community, and a damn good one at that.